What the city is talking about. This is Montreal Now on News Talk Radio, CJAD 800.
That is James MENNIE. He is over at the Montreal Gazette. Jim, let's begin with a really big story before we get on to the other. Did we just lose Jim? Oh, okay. We'll get him back. I want to ask Jim because I'm going to ask you this question again. So he's back on the line? Jim, can you hear me?
I can hear you clear as a bell.
Excellent.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're good now. I want to ask you what you think about really the big story, the overbearing story of the day, which is this eclipse on Monday. Are you as excited as half the people are?
All I want to do is tell you, young man, don't let me catch you staring into the sun on Monday. That's all, okay? Mm-hmm. I saw a story today. I laughed out loud. I saw a story today from the Sûreté de Québec on how to stay safe during the eclipse. And I thought it was the usual helpful, no, if you're driving down, the 40, don't stick your head out the window and look up at the sky because that could be dangerous. No, it was like everywhere, even if you're at home. I don't know why everybody is freaking out about this. We've had partial eclipses here before. Believe me, the hazard is equally there. I've never seen this much, unless, of course, it's because it really has been our last close up and personal was a partial eclipse, I think, in '94. That's the one they sent me down to cover at the planetarium. But all that said, what's happened since then? Well, you've got the internet, and you've got every expert and every non-expert, and everybody telling you don't go out there and Aaron, when you're out there looking at the eclipse, don't run around holding a pair of scissors, okay? Because that could be dangerous too. I mean, honest to God, can we stop for a second and understand that if this was that, look at history. We have records of full eclipses having taken place. We do not have records of scores or thousands of people who were blinded by the eclipse. People figure it out. People aren't stupid. Yet for some reason, everybody and their dog is suddenly an expert saying, "Well, don't look at the sun. Don't do this. Don't do that." It's kind of crazy. And now I saw a story. Well, will your dog go nuts if there's an eclipse? Yeah. Have you seen that one? If your pets go crazy?
Yeah, well, I've seen a whole thing about, first of all, not pets necessarily. We had a caller talk about wildlife. We have to be concerned about them as well. They're going to think it's night. What's going to happen? Are they going to run loose? I don't know. Maybe it's werewolves. I don't know.
They'll wake back up.
It's what?
It'll be a short night. They'll wake back up.
Yeah, I guess.
I think, honestly, I think there are humans that we should be worried about. They think it's night.
Jim,
you know what I mean?
Jim, I don't know what happened. We got not a great phone connection. You want to just either move or stand on your head or something and see if we can clear this up a bit?
It's the eclipse, Aaron. I'm pretty sure it's the eclipse. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you fine now. Okay, I guess this is okay.
It's a pre-eclipse
static.
Radiation.
Yeah, pre-eclipse static. I get it. Let me talk about the story you have at the top of the list today, which is why is protecting our vulnerable elderly from eviction such a tough sell? And I guess you mean for the government.
Well, indeed. For that nice Monsieur Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois of Quebec Solidaire. About 8 years ago, the National Assembly voted something called the Françoise David Act. Françoise David was the Quebec Solidaire MNA, and she managed to convince the government to make it impossible. If you're 70 years old, low income, and you've lived at the same rental address for 10 years, you cannot be evicted. And now Quebec Solidaire is saying on the basis of the ongoing housing crisis, that law should be extended to cover people who are 65 and who have lived at a rental property for 5 years. And it seems that the Legault government doesn't want to know. And maybe someone down there is looking at the ability to recycle rental properties. If you give too much protections, we're not going to be able to break out of the housing crisis at all. I think there's a very macabre element to the story as well. Maybe someone has sat down with an actuarial table and said, well, if somebody's 65 years old, or especially the 70-year-olds, if we just wait them out, and nature takes its course, so to speak, we're going to have a lot of rental properties opening up anyway. So why should we bother making any kind of legislation on this? But it's still interesting that when you consider François Legault's last real fundamental bulwark of political support are older Quebecers, older than 65, you think he'd be a little more, receptive to suggestions like this, rather than just giving him the cold shoulder, which he's doing right now. And even Nadeau-Dubois has turned around and said, "Listen, I'm ready to to negotiate. I'm ready to put some water in my wine, as we say in these parts. And yet there seems to be no reply from the government.
Look, this government with respect to housing is sort of stepped in it over and over again. And you kind of wonder, we refer back to the minister, of course, at the time when she was asked about renters, said, well, if you can't afford the rent, just go buy a place.
Yeah, exactly.
It hasn't gotten much better since then, has it?
No, not at all. And I think to a certain extent, though, Madame Duranceau, because that's the woman's name, that's the minister's name, I think she may have inadvertently put her finger on what the zeitgeist is in Quebec right now, because I think a lot of people will privately say, you know what, there's a housing crisis. There's a cheap housing crisis. And this seems to be the issue. I think a lot of people are simply unconcerned with that. And a lot of landlords out there are saying, listen, I'm sorry that, a lot of people are being hit hard by the economy, but there are a lot of people out there who have the money, who want to, find a rental property, and I don't have that inventory right now. We have to create that inventory. I mean, no one's covering themselves in glory here, Aaron, but on the other hand, as long as rental properties remain a profit-motivated business. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but as long as we're in that context, it's going to be difficult to sort of plead at any kind of excessive philanthropy and expect the people who are actually owning the buildings or building the buildings or maintaining the buildings to play along.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. All right, let me touch on this before we run out of time. It looks like this whole Northvolt situation is not going away anytime soon. I saw some people from the company talking the other day about how they're trying to do everything they have to be doing environmentally. You think that might have calmed some people down, but apparently environmental groups, not happy with what they've heard.
Well, the Center for Environmental Law is a group, as their name suggests, a group of lawyers who try to protect the environment in the courts. And you'll recall, we talked about them late last year. They tried to get an injunction just to put the whole Northvolt project on hold, pending a thorough environmental analysis. That fell through. The judge found there was no urgency to issue an interlocutory injunction. However, they're going back to court, and I love this. They're going back to court with the flat-out fact, and something the government doesn't deny, that when Northvolt came to, when they were trying to lure Northvolt over, they decided to rig the game. The regulations call for a battery factory that is going to install itself someplace to be subject to regulations. However, they discovered that Northvolt, the productivity of the factory was going to be about 56,000 tons annually. So they just changed the regulations saying if you produce 60,000 tons or less, you're not subject to public hearings for the environment. So they just changed the rules to suit this particular instance. And the Center for Environmental Law is turning around saying this is a dangerous slope to be sliding down, because pretty soon, and once again, I'm 100% right, once again, whether it's this government or the next government, somebody comes in and says, well, yeah, I'm going to bring all kinds of investment, just, change the rules for me. We may end up having much larger problems down the road than a housing crisis, especially if these places, these factories, which may have a bad effect on the environment, turn around and go south themselves. And I remain convinced that that's not off the table with Northvolt.
What's interesting to me here is we talked yesterday about this whole situation with hydro and the fact that, we're waking up to the fact that, we don't have limitless supplies of hydro. So we're trying to attract big companies like a Northvolt because at the end of the day, despite the fact they're going to be using so much hydro, this is good for Quebec. It creates jobs. And I get all that. Then you see what happens environmentally here with companies and groups getting together. Anytime there's an announcement like this made that involves the environment, which makes you wonder, maybe we don't have to do anything. Maybe these companies, these big companies in the future, will simply not come here because they don't want to go through this issue of having to deal with environmental groups.
Well, that's entirely possible. But on the other hand, if these regulations are either a sham and have no reason for being there, at which point, that opens up an entirely different debate, or they have to be fairly applied, which doesn't seem to have occurred here. And we've seen enough. Don't remember, Aaron, I think of all the projects, especially on the island of Montreal, but elsewhere, certainly in the 450, where hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent to decontaminate lands, because for generations you could basically dump anything whatsoever, as long as you dug a deep enough hole, and nobody thought anything about it until they realized, well, yeah, there's a water table out there. That might have some effect on that as well. We never considered that back then, which is why we have these regulations now. And I think they do exist for genuine reasons of public safety. And I don't like it when any government, this government or any other government, decides it wants to bend the rules because it wants to have some nice big fat photo op, Quebec investment project, which, as I say, the effectiveness of which remains to be seen.
James Mennie at the Montreal Gazette. Jim, thank you. Have a good weekend.
And be careful about a cliff.
See you on a cliff stay.
All
right.
Okay.